We've heard about the Great Resignation, and anybody in IT knows that it's hard to find people, especially if you're looking for security professionals, data scientists, or AI experts. And there have been many competing theories about why this is. So we're going to be talking with an industry expert, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, this is Chris Brandt here with Sandesh Patel. Welcome to another FUTR podcast. 95% of the people who watch this podcast are not subscribed, so it'd be really awesome if you did. It really helps the channel. Today we're talking with Giancarlo Hirsch, GloComs Managing Director. GloComs is the technology side of the massive international recruitment firm Phaidon, and he's going to tell us what he sees in the tech labor market, how to go about finding and retaining great talent, and steps you can take to advance your tech career. Welcome, Giancarlo.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. Excited to chat.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about this. This is like so top of mind for so many people. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how many times, Sandesh and I are in a meeting and people are like, we gotta just find the right people. We gotta hire this guy or that guy. And, we have no security people. It's really, and it's all over the news. So it's a big story right now. But before we get there, tell me a little bit about, how GloComs came to be and, where did that come from?
I'll zoom back even from GloComs and talk about Phaidon International just for a quick sec. So like you mentioned, that's our holding company. We were sort of built out in London in 2004 and then came to the States in 2013 and have really expanded quickly since then. But Phaidon is our holding company where we have 6 different brands that specialize into different end markets. Now, of those brands, majority of them are actually industry specific. So we have a financial services arm, a life sciences arm, a renewable energy and infrastructure arm. And then we also have a few industry agnostic brands, like a legal and compliance brand, an end-to-end supply chain business, and then the emerging technology business that I oversee is entirely industry agnostic, right? So we partner with those various customers across the different industries, and then we also work directly within that tech industry. So GloComs, obviously the name sort of gives it away, came about as a telecoms business back in Europe in the early 2010s. And that was obviously in line with the market that we were seeing back in those days out in Europe. But when I sort of took over and set it up here in the US at the end of 2015, it was very clear that the CEO, Harry, and I wanted to create a vision that was much more around emerging tech, right? And what does that mean, right? So we started talking about the idea that monetizing and securing data is sort of at the forefront of every business's challenge, right? And this has been going on for, 20-ish years now, right? At least 15, but we're sort of about 20 years into just like data's everywhere, right? And the idea that securing that data has become extremely high profile is something that's really scaled up over the last 10-ish years, right? So we felt like we were right at the crux of where we wanted to be for what is qualified as like emerging, right? Mm-hmm. So GloComs focuses on data, cyber, and then we have a software development practice as well as our 3 technical verticals. And then we have a commercial services practice that help our customers on their go-to-market strategy, sort of that hovers horizontally across those 3 technical verticals. So you figure we work with a lot of data vendors, we work with a lot of software vendors, and we work with a lot of cyber vendors. We also work with the end users and these enterprise customers that are actually integrating and deploying these products. So from a consultative standpoint, right, we talk about recruitment, exceptionally transactional. It's very difficult to not get a bad name in the recruiting world as a middle person. You're stealing fees, right? Right. But, what we're really doing is penetrating a market such that we have access to talent that, like you mentioned to start the conversation, companies are struggling to find themselves, right? Big time. So from a consulting standpoint, having that end user and vendor model gives us an opportunity to provide really clear-cut industry insights on both sides. So we can go to, let's say, a cyber vendor that's selling firewalls, right? And we can say, look, the banks are using a hybrid model because you don't offer these features that they have to get from Palo Alto Networks, right? And then on the flip side of that, we can go talk to this small vendor and say, we can go talk to the bank and say, hey, look, these guys are coming out with a couple new features, want to put it on your radar. From a cost perspective, might make sense for you to consider dropping down to only 2 firewalls as your hybrid model, is instead of using all 3 different ones, only because it might help you from, let's say, like building a more proprietary network type of standpoint, right? If we're talking about the banks and the pharma companies, they like to integrate these products and then build them out from more of a proprietary standpoint. So I think like that in a nutshell gives you a sort of perspective on the unique business model that we have that's in a quite saturated technology recruiting field, right? So we charge pretty high margins, and one of the reasons we're able to do so is because of that model I just described.
Yeah, I think, I think what you describe as your model is sort of spot on with what, Sandesh and I see in the market in terms of what people's needs are. But I also think it's good that you guys are aligned along your, specific areas of expertise, because technology recruiting in particular is not something just anybody can do. It's got a special skill set.
Over the years, what we've learned is by saying no to your standard IT role, right? A Salesforce developer or an IT analyst. Like we don't work any of those roles. We work highly specialized roles that require high levels of academic training, 3 to 7 years of professional pedigree in most cases. So it does offer, exactly like you're saying, a very unique sort of perspective into a market.
We keep seeing headlines all the time about the Great Resignation, right? And, that must be a great time for recruiters when everybody's sort of leaving great. And changing jobs. The sort of market volatility is good for you there. But I mean, one, is that a real thing? And, what's sort of driving that, and how does that impact your business?
I can definitely confirm the Great Resignation. That is definitely a thing. Now, I like to look at it as the other side of the spectrum, which is a huge amount of hiring going on, right?
Great hiring.
That's what is right. It's the great hiring, right? So the reason behind it, I would argue, is reasonably compensation driven right now in some capacity. Like what we're seeing is a surge of candidates coming out of large tech companies where they have historically grown extremely strong skill sets, having exposure to massive data sets and problem solving at a very high scale. And those tech companies have sort of gotten comfortable in their model of offering people pretty low, crappy base salaries and a bunch of RSUs to keep them in the business for as many years as possible. And another thing that they've done over the years to really shoot themselves in the foot is create a vesting schedule for these RSUs where year one, you're not really seeing anything, right? And so your teeth aren't really sunk in until year 3 and 4 when you're the 40% sort of range of those RSUs.
Can you just explain what RSUs are for everybody?
Yeah, totally. Of course, RSUs are restricted stock units, right? So public companies or pre-IPO companies will offer employees or prospective employees restricted stock units, and they will be restricted in that they vest over an explicit time frame. And once they are vested in a public setting, like if you have Google stock or Amazon stock or Netflix stock, you can sell them once they're vested. So in some capacity, that is a real cash value for a year.
And that's a huge thing for tech companies because they have more equity sometimes than cash.
Way more. Yeah, most of the comp structures are about 40% cash and 60% equity. When we're talking a $500K comp package, you're not really getting $250 in cash between your base and bonus.
Right. The Great Resignation's real.
Yep.
What are the companies that are attracting this talent doing? What's different about them? I mean, you mentioned salary is kind of a thing, but I got to imagine there's a little bit more to it than just salary.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot more to it than salary, to be fair. So, we've seen different sort of insights for the different markets that we cover. So I think it's interesting to share some of the marketing data that we have around, like I mentioned, software developers, data scientists, and data professionals, and then more like cyber professionals, right? If we lump them into 3 different categories, it's interesting because, most of the reason why software and data people are looking for a new job is because they're looking for a new challenge where they feel like they no longer have exposure to the proprietary data that they were excited about getting involved with when they first started, or they have, the business has scaled up to a point where the level of autonomy that they have in their seat is no longer significant enough. And so 400, 500K is great and all, but if I am taking orders and writing code based on what I'm told every day, then it's not the same feeling when you wake up in the morning, right? And so a lot of that is the underlying motivator for leaving right now is that you could argue it's like boredom almost in your complacency in the seat, right? And I think that you can look at these big tech companies and really point the finger at how well have you done to inspire and retain your staff when, look, you hired out of Harvard and MIT and Carnegie Mellon, right? Like,
right.
You got the best talent. But now you got to do the legwork to make sure that they sit there and make your business better every year, right? And I think we're noticing, like, Amazon's had a really tough time with like a 10-month sort of average tenure at one point. I think that was about last year. I think they're doing a little better now. They've restructured the way they vest their RSUs to try and get people to say, hey, you got a little bit of the pie from year one. Now you want to stay there, right?
That seems like the wrong way to make people stay, though. It's like kind of a bribe for the future.
Yeah, look, I think the best way to make people stay is to expand and grow into new markets, right? So like these companies are doing that, and that's why everyone wants to be at these companies, right? It's not like Google, Apple, and Amazon are not going to be in new industries in the next 5 years, and that's where the excitement is, right? But I think if you look at like a TikTok, for example, that's a much more exciting problem to solve every day than going to Facebook. Facebook solved that problem 15 years ago, right? And so you get to go have fun every day trying to solve those problems at scale, much larger scale than Facebook was dealing with 10 years ago, right? When they were at Harvard and MIT only or whatever. But, that sort of challenge and that access to proprietary data is the motivator. Now, security professionals are actually given everything we just talked about the data and software professionals aren't given, right? So security professionals, there's much less of them. They're paid 25 to 30% higher on a year per year experience basis based on the sort of niche level of skill set they bring to the table. Also, just so we're clear, you can't really be a great security engineer if you couldn't be an incredible software engineer, right? You got to take that skill set and then grow it further into a deeper niche or market. And so, hence the increased margin on the comp, if you will. But security professionals actually get that autonomy. They get the decision-making power because the rest of the engineering team doesn't have the familiarity with that market. And so you get to decide what products to buy. You get to decide what products to build. You get to talk about security at a high architectural level. Even if you're just building features, you're still in that conversation because the VP of engineering or the head of engineering or the engineering managers that are running teams that build web applications and core software functionality don't have that level of security acumen, right? So we find that security professionals are staying in their jobs for more like 2 years at least, which has become a reasonably long tenure in this new tech industry, right? Wow. So 2+ years in the security world is actually pretty standard, and it's because the first 90 days of being a security engineer, you get less done than the first 90 days of being a software engineer because it's not plug and play. It's let's talk and let's decide. And then you go roll out all that functionality over the next couple of years. And so you get to a point where if you do it right, you don't work yourself out of a job. You work yourself into having a bigger job where you now hire 3 different people to build out 3 new functions within your security org, right? And so we found that that's an interesting sort of data point when it comes to the Great Resignation and how people are moving around and where they're moving. I guess from a where they're moving standpoint, no matter how high the cost of living is, New York City and the Bay Area and Northern California are still the 2 most preferred places for these people to want to work. So I think that's interesting, right? We saw at the beginning of COVID, maybe everyone wanted to go to Denver and Atlanta, but it I don't know if it's just Elon's cry, but I think they're coming back a little bit. And I don't know, I think at the same front, when we talk about, this is outside of hiring and recruitment, but just sort of global resources and the economy, the metropolitan areas will become valuable again, given how resources have become so expensive, right? And I think that is apparent in the job hunting right now.
Well, I would say, like from what we've seen is there's a lot, I don't think remote's going away, but I don't think it's going to be 100% remote. There's going to be a blend there. And, it was interesting, Bipul Sinha, who's the CEO of Rubrik, he mentioned something early on about this. And he said, there's what we're seeing is a lot of productivity now with people working from home. And just like productivity's gone up. But he said, what I think is missing for us is the creativity isn't there. You get a lot of productivity, but not a ton of creativity. And he said that's where a lot of that's going to come back.
And that results in the Great Resignation, right? That results in what I was just describing, right? That's complacency, and you're being comped like crazy to sit in your lovely home, and then you're bored. So that's where we end up, right? And now who can challenge me in their next setting? But I totally agree with you. I think that a hybrid environment is going to be very, very standard. I think that anyone would be foolish not to offer people that sort of level of flexibility. But if you can't drive culture and collaboration, you will not get any innovation or creativity, to your point. I totally agree with you. And so it compounds their issues on both sides.
There's a recent defection from Apple, Ian Goodfellow, big in their, ML side of the house. They said, we're coming back to the office. And he said, okay, bye.
So he can do that, right? That's a big name in the industry. But the 26-year-olds making $700,000 at Tesla are not getting $700,000 anywhere else.
Right.
So they can choose if they want to go back to work or not, because nobody's stock price is up like that. Right. Well, so it's like there's a balance.
I mean, like Sandesh, he's only had 2 jobs in his life, and he's been at this one for what, 30 years or something. I
Almost
mean, like
20. What? Almost 20.
what keeps you planted?
That's a great question. Let's just say that I've resigned a couple times and decided to stay. That's literally what happened. The grass is
greener problem?
Well, no, I never left. I just wanted to leave. I was frustrated for all the reasons, many of the reasons that we're discussing here. But ultimately, what keeps me here is the culture and the people. It's the compensation is definitely part of it, being on the sales side. I mean, obviously, that is something that I am motivated by, but it's really the people and the culture. But in the defense of some of these companies, I think it's hard to, maintain these cultures when they're going through change. And there's so many companies right now that are going through change. COVID has definitely accelerated that. So on one side, you have, the CEO that's saying, hey, we got to change our business and we got to make sure we start moving this way. We can't keep going this way. And then at the same time, he has the whole fiduciary responsibility of making sure that the stock keeps going up. And when he goes to the board meetings, he's putting up good numbers, right? And so that's where I see the
she
conflict.
In our case, we should.
Or she in our case. But I'm not just pointing fingers at any specific company. I'm just saying in general, what happens that I've seen is like, the guys who hold the money, they want to do the right things. They want to keep their people. They really do. They understand culture and they understand compensation, but at the same time, they have to change and they have to keep up with this whole fiduciary responsibility. And I think sometimes those two are in conflict, totally. And sometimes it's hard to get both.
Yeah, no, we've especially, so we work a lot with startups in early-ish stages, right? We'll track funding cycles. We'll get involved after a recent round. It's easy to get to 20, 50 people within your network, but when you go from 50 to 100, it's very challenging, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, when the funding and scale is what's driving the innovation, as opposed to the innovation driving the funding and scale,
right?
You're in the 99% category of startups that will not work out. Right.
Right.
And so, it's interesting. We actually recently just were acquired by a new private equity company, a company called FUTR Global. Super exciting. This week, actually, it's the 3rd time we've had a financial instrument or investment in the sort of 7.5 years I've been here. And it brings these questions to the table, right? It's like, so now what journey are we going on? And I think one thing that our CEO, Harry Utan, has done the most impressive job I've seen in doing is staying true to who we are and continuing to take this journey forwards, right? There was a time 3 transactions ago where we talked about going public. We don't really talk about that anymore because it's maybe not the dream anymore. Yeah. It's pretty fun to get passed around these private equity companies, right? And so now we're talking a lot more about the professional services side of the business that we offer, right? I just mentioned to you the sort of consultative approach that we take. We're not transactional recruiters. We're not finding you candidates on Indeed. We're going and hitting people up that are gainfully employed and passive and not really looking, and giving them a little golden carrot and explaining to them why this might be the chance for them to take the next step in their career. And so, to present ourselves as a professional services company, to want to compete with the likes of Deloitte and Ernst & Young. Okay, so you can offer a fresh grad out of Penn State $65K, and they're not going to grow their career for 14 years. and they'll get 140K in 14 years from now. Now, we can offer people 45K on their salary, but we can turn people into subject matter experts because of how niche and an inch wide and a mile deep we go into these markets. And so by year one, you'll make your 90 and then some, right? So you can even beat your first year earnings. You probably work a little harder at Phaidon than you're at GloComs than you will at Ernst & Young. But from a scale perspective, I have people with less than 2 years of experience that have 3 people under them that they're scaling a team around them. And that's off the back of organic business, right? That is not a fiduciary responsibility to grow headcount. We're growing headcount because of our organic business model that brings a business, a platform forward that offers us an organic model to scale, right? And so Harry was a fresh grad as the CEO now, right? I was a fresh grad. There's really no one in a leadership seat who didn't go through the same channels and hoops and hurdles that the 7 kids I hired on Monday are going to go through, right? And so we're never going to run out of fresh 22-year-old graduates who are hungry to make $100,000 in their first year. Right. All we've got to do is make our model better than the Big Four's model for helping people grow their careers internally, right? So how quickly can we get them to be subject matter experts? What material and training modules do we have to be able to say that 7 years ago, it took me 180 days, but now I can get you to be an expert in 60 days, right? And so that snowball effect and that consistency around a model and that organic structure is something that I think is very unique in the industry. And that's the reason I could never see myself going anywhere, is because it's like, I get everything I'm looking for in an opportunity. And then every few years I get to see that in the reward of value coming to the private options that I have, right? So we talked about RSUs. Yeah. Private companies usually offer options or in some cases even basis points if they're that early stage and they haven't even gotten any funding yet. Yeah. But these are the types of things that we talk to candidates about. And so it's really fun to be able to even use our own business as an example. And we talk to the consultants about doing exactly that, right? Explain to them, like, you could have taken a 75K base, but you chose 45 because of the opportunity. And you see the people around you stepping into seats that your friends are not stepping into, right? And they started on a higher base. And so the story and the narrative and the examples, I think, are something that a lot of businesses have gotten away from over the years and have focused more on the customers that they're acquiring and the total number of followers they have and the total number of engineers that they have. Like, that's really cool that you have 600 engineers, but you could probably get 20 of them to do the same thing, right? Goldman's a great example. Goldman has a very tightly knit engineering org, and they sort of frown upon the rest of the banks who have 10 times the scale, right? There's 300 security professionals at JP, there's 60 at Goldman. Think about how much more ownership all 60 of those people at Goldman have versus being 1/3 of as responsible, right? And so that sort of environment and that sort of tightly knit structure where you get ownership and autonomy and can then organically scale, we've seen great success for those businesses over the last bunch of years.
Well, I think it comes back around to culture again. Like, culture is a really important thing. And I think leadership doesn't always recognize how important they are to the process of culture, because and it's as you scale too, that it's really important.
Right, as you scale,
because
it gets diluted.
And you have now managers who are responsible for implementing that culture who may not have been there long enough to really understand the culture, and it's, you got to be communicated.
Totally. Communication is all of it. And honestly, that's the coolest part about it, I think, right, is the golden thread, right? And so to your point, people don't take jobs for compensation, right? Sandesh, you mentioned, right? It's usually the person you work for, right? Like, you take the job because of the person you work for. You stay in the job because of the person you work for. The other two components are the ownership and autonomy that you have over the role. Like, what do you actually do? And how can you, on Thanksgiving when you're with your family, describe the role that you had for the last 12 months? And if it's really important, you feel good about it. If you find yourself sort of being like, I did this, you're not going to feel as good on Monday. And then lastly is compensation, right? So I think, to your point, culture and that collaborative, competitive, inspirational environment is the current biggest challenge for businesses to maintain, because the hybrid environment, people pushing themselves out, comp becoming a more higher sort of ranked motivator because it's accessible. So I think, really interesting chat right there in general about just sort of what makes somebody stay, what makes somebody tick, what makes somebody start with that company, and how you can do the best to retain people. I talk to my directors all the time now. I say, your job's very different now. Your job is very simple. You have 4 things to do. You have to hire people, you have to train them, you have to inspire them, and you have to retain them. That's it. Everything else pushes down right on the next layer, and we keep going. And so if you can keep that model without having it be diluted from the CEO to the MD to the 4 directors, then you can create a structure that high performance is consistent, right? Because you don't want to have 20 people doing as much work as 12 people. The investors don't like that very much.
Yeah, well, another phenomenon I see so often in companies, and I've been guilty of it myself too, is within companies, the career advancement path that people perceive is sort of like, well, I go from doing this very specific thing that requires a lot of expertise, but now my next career path should be manager, right. And so like, I'm the top sales guy, now I should be the manager, right? Right. And that so often fails spectacularly because that's not the skill set that really is great for a lot of people, right?
You are spot on, Chris. I made that mistake and I learned from it, right? I was 8 months into my career when I started managing, right? So I very much had that path that you just mentioned where I became an expert at what I was doing. And then I moved out of the financial services market, started a whole new market, hired 3 people, and I was training them how to do something I'd never done before, right? Very challenging. And so the first 3 years were very challenging. The third year was very successful, though. We got to 20 people. We had the 4 different teams I described. We were finally into those end markets. And I took my 4 best billers and I said, you guys run these 4 teams now, or you people, because a couple of them are women, right?
Yep.
One worked, 3 failed, right? And that's my fault. It was an amateur management move.
Yep.
I thought that I'm a director now. I've got to scale. I need to have 4 reports. I can't keep having 20 because I literally had 20 people reporting directly to me at one point, which is max. Yeah. And so I was like, we got to go to the next step. But what makes someone a killer salesperson is not what makes person compassionate and understanding and able to work through problems that entry-level people will ask a second and third time in the same 45-minute session that you're working with them on something, right?
Yep.
And so it took me a whole year to figure that out, and it took me almost another year to fix it. And so year 4 and 5 got us back to where 3 was, really, if you ask me. I mean, we did a little better, but by the end of 5, we were where we should have been at the end of 3. And then year 6, we took off because then we had the right people in the right seats doing the right jobs, right? So year 5, we're back to 25 people and $3 million. Year 6, we go to 6 million and grow to 40 people. And this year 7, we're at 75 people and we've got $17 million already up against sort of trying to get to 18, see if we can do triple, right? Yeah. So, the level of growth at this point has sort of just become ridiculous in some capacity, and it's because you got the right people in the right seats doing the right jobs, and that took 24 months really to figure out.
Well, that's the hard part though, right? Is to find those right people for those jobs. You guys are trying to solve for a really hard problem in the market, right? Like the people you're trying to get are very specialized. They're probably picky because they can be, right? Because like everybody wants good them. They're so choices. Good.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But when you said that, when you were talking about leadership, and Chris was talking about how the culture comes from the leaders and managers and stuff. I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but like I feel like COVID especially, I think so many leaders, just because they have big titles and big responsibilities and everything else, they're human beings. And they have things going on in their personal lives. They were affected by COVID in however many different ways, right? And I feel like people have started to reevaluate their priorities in life and where like work, like I know Chris and I were traveling 50% and we were just working like crazy, like, 70, 80 hours. And like, and when we thought that we were doing the right thing for our families, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if we were because it seemed like we were always in fights with our wives. But yeah, man, I feel like there's some of the mental health part of things has impacted people in the workplace. It's hard to be creative when you're not emotionally connected to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really wise point there in terms of what we're seeing, because that's where you start losing the opportunity to retain people, is when the inspirational leaders are no longer inspirational, right?
Exactly.
And so we've probably seen a bit of that, to be fair. And I think we've seen a bit of, taking advantage of the level of flexibility that you might have because you're more senior, right? So like, for example, our company, the first 90 days, we would expect you to be in the office every day, right? Like, you don't know anything, you just got out of college, let's teach you something. Then after 90 days, we'll give you the 4 days per month that you can use at your own discretion. If you want to spend a week down at the beach and take one vacation day and work from home for 4 days, like, you can do that. If that, that'll help your mental health, it'll help you come back the next week and work more productively. But once you get to the next level, which is principal, which is sort of like the beginning of the journey, I always tell people, right? That's what I got to after 8 months in the financial services business. I started making hires, and you can start to get paid percentages on a team once you get to the principal level, right? And principals all the way up to the CEO, we get 8 days per month. And so the fact that there is a very clear-cut lead by example type of scenario there, I think we're actually in a pretty good spot, right? When the leaders take 7 days a month and the mid managers and individual contributors are taking 2 days a month, it just doesn't create the right type of culture and environment, right? So if working from home is your ultimate sort of goal, we'll push you more towards an individual contributor route because it's not as productive a management model, especially just because our model is very much organic entry-level hiring, as opposed to, if I hired an experienced recruiter, then sure, you could sit in your house in Chicago and message me and get stuff done. And we have a lot of success hiring people actually in Europe, in London mostly, and then bringing them over. And for the first 6 months, we get them going remotely. But as an entry-level person, it's really difficult to create that collaborative and competitive environment where people learn from each other. And, hearing a sales floor makes you better at sales. And I think totally. It's important to feel that.
Yeah, because it helps the competition too, right?
Totally.
It's like I remember when I was in inside sales, when I heard other people on calls, and here I am just sitting there eating my sandwich, browsing ESPN. Yeah. I'm like, oh crap, I got to get back on the phones. Totally. It's great motivation. What's your experience with the millennials, Gen Zers now that are coming straight out of college? Like what are some themes that you're seeing? What are they looking for? What vibes to them?
I love them all, so I'll start with that, right? So, and I'm a millennial, so I'm biased, right? I think we're great. I think we want to take over the world, and we love change, and we're ready to take on leadership seats, and it's our turn. But and we've actually had a lot of success with millennials, to be candid. The group of us who have been here for the sort of 5 to 10 year range, a lot of us have been pretty successful in finding a model and market that works for us. I think it's a very unique business, right? Like, there's not a lot of companies that give you the reins to build your career in the way that Phaidon has. And so it's not for everyone, but the people who love it have done really, really well. I joke with the Gen Zers all the time because that's the new group coming in. And I would say that there is definitely a trend towards work-life balance and feeling like they have an important place in this company before they've even really created that for themselves. And so it's an interesting way to create a culture and environment now from a hiring, training, inspiring, and retaining standpoint. Because if I'm going to hire them, I've got to present our job in a slightly different way. I used to tell the millennials, like, if you want to make $100,000 in your first year and make $300K in your third year, like, this is the job for you. That doesn't make the Gen Zers tick quite as much. I find that the opportunity to inspire people to make career changes and how many career changes, Sandesh, you said you've only had 2, right? Most people have like 4, 5, 7, right? It's not a lot, right? So you get married, that's a big decision. You buy a couple houses, those are huge decisions. You change your career 5 or 6 times. Those are huge decisions. And so being a part of that human decision-making process is extremely rewarding and satisfying for people in general. And it's so obvious, right? It feels so good when you get that candidate, the great job that they've been working their ass off for. You didn't help them do the coding test, but you got them involved and it feels so good, right? Totally. And so we talk a lot more about that than some of the more, I guess, individualized career progression type of things. On the flip side of that, I don't want to take anything away from the new gen, I think, it's a different model to get to the same place, right? Because it's not to say that they're less motivated. It's not to say that they're less inspired to take on big roles. It's that the path that they are interested and willing to take to get there is definitely not as straight as the one that my millennial friends have been willing to just go down the yellow brick road, right? And it has definitely been more of a journey in the way that we work towards these sort of career progressions. But again, like I'm saying, it's definitely not any slower, right? It's not like we promoted millennial people faster than we promoted Gen Zers. It's just what makes them happy, what gets them to tick, their perception of what business casual is, right? All of those good things.
Beyond not going into management, are there a couple things that you could recommend to people that this is the best way to advance your career?
If we're talking like software engineers, we're talking technical folks, right? Mm-hmm. Software, data, security people. I think, first of all, you've got to be stakeholder facing. I don't want to say customer facing, but you've got to be able to be communicative and you've got to enjoy that aspect. Too many people who make all this money are much less interested in having a conversation with anyone. And it's really not going to help progress the business or anything or your career. So I think you got to get over that hump a little bit and think there's a lot in it for me to be able to have more of a voice than just my hands on my keyboard, right? And so inspiring people to feel that, I think, is an important thing. Another thing to think about is the experience, right? And so when I talk about what makes a great candidate, I talk about three things, right? We talk about academic pedigree, we talk about professional pedigree, and we talk about tenure, right? And so I know I told you that 2 years is long now, so tenure conversations has become very challenging with the clients. They're like, they have a new job every 2 years. I'm like, you're lucky it's not every 8 months. I don't know what to tell you, right? Not everyone's like Sandesh out there. So I think that historically, you wanted to see 4, 5, 6, 7 years in a seat, and it's very clear why, right? Because you see product development through multiple iterations. You put something out there, and then you have to deal with the problems. You can't just do it and then leave, right? You got to see how it plays out. Yeah. So those three generically are what we're talking about, but I think that gaining exposure in both a very large enterprise, large company, in addition to getting experience at a much smaller company, that's the ultimate level of experience. Like Microsoft would rather hire someone who worked at Google and at a pre-IPO startup and helped them go public than someone who went from Google to Facebook to Microsoft. And it's partially because you get very similar experience at all of those companies, right? Massive data sets. I don't care if you're using Azure, AWS, or GCP, because the reality is you can figure the next one out too, right? It's not problem solving that's the issue. It's exposure to technologies, right? So that's simple. But if you only ever work in one of those two environments, you put yourself in a much more handicapped seat when it comes to the role you can play in any environment, right? So sure, there's definitely the people who have spent 25 years at Amazon who are crushing it there that are probably never going to leave, and I understand why, right? But 4, 5, 6 years into your career, it makes a lot of sense to step outside and go to a place where you get some of that private equity if you're worried about comp, right? Because you're going to have to forgo some of the cash comp when you make this decision. And I can just basically assure you all who are listening that it will bode well for you in the long run. You will make way more money 4 years down the line after the 8 years, 4 and 4, than you would if you spent 8 years at that tech giant. And definitely the same is true from a startup world. There's people who love starting at the beginning, getting to the end, and then going back to the beginning and starting over. It's risky, right? It doesn't always work, right? And so if you're that good, then, high fives all around, and there are definitely some people who are. But I think, the best type of experience is academic pedigree that's exceptional. You surround yourself with really sort of intellectual people. You problem solve in a really rudimentary way. And then you get into either a big company where you're exposed to massive data and scale and the problems that come with that. But also you're exposed to incredibly new technologies that are available to you, potentially before the rest of the market, right? If you work at Amazon, you get to use tools before everyone else gets to use them. So that's exciting. But then on the flip side of that, the scalability side of it, you kind of have to get outside of the main road and go build a lane on the left side of the highway all by yourself and go as fast as you want, right? And so I think coupling those two skill sets together make for the most valuable person, right? Think about a resourceful versus an unresourceful environment and what that forces you to do as an individual. So if you're comfortable in a resourceful environment, get out of it, right? If you're comfortable in an unresourceful environment and you've had fun scaling these businesses, but you've never really worked with a large amount of data or scale, and you've never taken a product to go from here to here, then jump into the deep end and check it out, right? And then go back and you'll see, then you'll have visibility. You'll actually know how to get there next time, right? And so I think it's the coupling of those two skill sets that is when people start making ridiculous amounts of money, right? Because they can problem solve. They could do it all, right? Because once you get back to the resourceful environment, now you could write any check you want. So it's very easy. Or the person next to you will write the check for you, or however it works, right? So that would be the way I describe that, right?
Yeah, I think that's exceptional advice. I mean, one is it's sort of like bimodal IT. You have like stability and then flexibility, right? You gotta kind of balance those two things out. So tell me, what's next for GloComs?
More of the same is genuinely the ambition, right? 75 people is just the beginning of how many people I want to have in these markets. So if I can sort of elaborate on the teams really quickly to give you guys a little bit of an understanding of how we'll grow. So software, right? Big word. Same with data and same with cyber. We'll break them down, right? So software, we talk about creative technology. So we've seen a huge amount of influx of talent into the mobile, UX and web development space, especially UX, right? Because that's all about what the customer feels like when they're using your product, right? So that's a buzzing market. And we break it down in that way. So again, like I said, we're very specialized. We don't do a lot of stuff in software. We only do creative. We do core, which is like back-end, regular software development, some engineering leadership. And then we do DevOps, cloud, and automation. So I see an opportunity to eventually have a fourth technical pillar called cloud or DevOps, or probably cloud, right? Cloud and infrastructure, whatever you want to call it. But it's an organic growth model that I made a mistake 4 years ago that I will not make again, which is I need like 15 people in the team within software before I call it its own team, right? And then we can continue to penetrate, because one person penetrating does 1/4 as much as 4 of us do, right? And so we got to have teams of 4 to 6 to 8 to be able to get to the market. That's software. Then we talk about data. Data, big word, right? Or not a big word, but lots encompassed in it. So we talk a lot about data science, right? Statistical modeling, all that formal mathematical modeling. Then we talk about data analytics and business intelligence, right? We talk a lot about data engineering. And then we talk about machine learning engineers. Now, machine learning engineers and data engineers are the same as software engineers, right? So we slap up against these two business units, and the tangential style with which we work really describes how deep we are in the market, right? So if you're working with a Python developer that is much more comfortable pipelining data using Redshift and ETL processes, that's a data engineer, even though you were a Python developer last week, right? And so the skill sets sort of overlapping, I think, gives us a lot of runway ahead.
Yeah.
Now we go to cyber. Cyber is a very complicated market to break down. So the way we talk about it is we talk about product and security engineering, which is sort of like offensive security, if you will, a little bit more proactive. Then we talk about security operations, which is a little bit more reactive, like blue team type of work. And then we talk about information security, which is just, IT GRC, data protection, and compliance type stuff. So by having different teams broken down into different areas, I would argue that all 75 people have a vision for how they can build their own 20-person, $4 million business in a specific market, whether that be the incident response team within the security operations team for the cyber business, or the core software team that focuses solely on health tech and pharma versus the core software team that focuses solely on big tech, right? We have a lot of opportunities of how to grow out the markets, whether it be continuing to go down the yellow brick road of niche skill set and be as industry agnostic as possible, or eventually, organically, we get into a more industry specific model that is even more attractive for customers, right? Yeah. So I think that it's going to be more of the same for GloComs. We're not going to start doing new things because there's no cooler technologies out there than the ones we work on. Blockchain and crypto come up a lot, right? Yeah. So that's definitely an area we talk a lot about. And I think, we do a lot of work within that environment, but again, it's a skill set that is transferable, right? That's what's beautiful about technology. It's not like you can't become someone in the next couple of years, right? You've got to work towards it, but it's a very transferable skill set from a computer science fundamental problem solving standpoint. Yeah. And so because of the nature of the market and the way that we're positioned in it, I feel really confident that we can continue to scale and grow to 500 people without doing anything new. The team I didn't break down for you guys yet, I'd love to just touch base on it for a sec, is the commercial practice, right? I said it spans horizontally across those 3 verticals, helping customers on their go-to-market strategy. So we break that down into 3 spaces. We do product and program management. We do sales, which then breaks down further into technical and non-technical. And then we do marketing. And so, again, marketing, not that sexy and niche, if I can say that out loud right now, right? Not the highest salaries. But when we're talking about marketing professionals that have experienced marketing for managed security service providers within the cyber vendor space, now we're talking a service that is quite valuable for our customers.
Very specialized,
right? So very specialized, right? Same with sales professionals, right? An AE is not exceptionally niche unless they're in data intensive environment and they're familiar with SaaS platforms that sell certain types of solutions or whatever it may be, right? And so those are the types of personnel that we're working with. And I think that the niche markets that we cover are continuing to grow such that we've got a lot of runway ahead. So I would say that what's next for GloComs is more of the same. I'll say internally, I definitely have a bit of I don't want to say chip on my shoulder. I'll just put it as an aspiration. And that is that I firmly believe that technology, as not only an industry agnostic industry, but as an industry itself, is bigger and better than finance and pharma and supply chain and life science and and renewable energy and legal, right?
Yeah.
So, I used to think it was so cool. We have huge relationships with the biggest banks in the world, right? Google's worth more than all 3 of them combined, right? So I used to think it was cool. So my goal and the brand's goal is to be the largest contributing brand for Phaidon. We're definitely not there yet, right? Our financial services arm has been around for all 20 years. We've only been around for about 8.
Yeah.
And so we've got some catching up to do. But I always joke, they're up in first class, driving a Rolls Royce, doing 90 miles an hour, drinking champagne. We're in like an 85 Porsche doing 130. We're 2,000 miles behind them. But when we pass, we're going to zoom right by them because 120 and 85 are very different. It just takes a little while. So that's my vision. That's where we want to take the business. My goal is that, once upon a time when Phaidon goes public or has our next exit and reaches multiple billions of dollars of evaluation, I'd like it to be because GloComs is at the forefront of what we do. That's
awesome. Well, best of luck to you. I mean, just a really interesting business model you guys have around this. It's it sounds like you're really going after the right pieces of the market, and thanks for sharing so much good wisdom about advancing our careers. I think that'll be definitely helpful for so many people. Thank you so much for being on. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much. Sandesh, appreciate the chat. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where you guys go. Thanks for watching. Love to hear from you in the comments. And if you like what you saw, please give us a like and think about subscribing. That subscription really helps the channel to grow. And I will see you in the next video.